So I want to welcome the Sdsu community. I am pleased that all of you could join us today in person and virtually to engage with CSU Chancellor Castro and myself in his listening tour of each of the 23 CSU campuses. But first, I want to ensure we open today's session, as we do all major campus events, with our Sdsu land acknowledgement. For millennia, the Kumeyaay people have been a part of the land. This land has nourished, healed, protected, and embraced them for many generations in a relationship of balance and harmony. As members of the San Diego State community, we acknowledge this legacy. We promote this balance and harmony. We find inspiration from this land, the land of the Kumeyaay. I'd like to now provide a couple of brief instructions on how attendees can ask their questions and how we'd like the next 45 minutes to go. Before I introduce Chancellor Castro and we jump into the Q&A, nearly 100 questions were submitted from across our faculty, staff, and student community over the last 2 weeks, covering a wide variety of topics. For the first 30 minutes, I will ask Chancellor Castro questions from among those submitted. However, you'll notice that we have maintained the QR code and link behind us, and the portal to submit your questions remains open. We will reserve the last 15 minutes to ask questions which come in live during the town hall. So please feel free to submit new questions at any time. Also, to access the restrooms and to exit, please exit at the rear of the theater upstairs. I would also like to take a moment to acknowledge that freedom of speech is an important value within our university community. Out of respect for other guests in attendance and to ensure we can publicly address and answer as many of the community's submitted questions as possible, should there be any disruptions, I will ask that individuals please allow the program to continue. Individuals may be asked to leave as a courtesy to others, both here and online, who wish to hear the rest of the event. If disruptions continue, we will endeavor to respond to questions through the Zoom webinar format. Again, out of respect for those who are submitted questions from across our community, please reflect on these considerations. So now, it is my distinct pleasure to welcome Chancellor Castro to Sdsu. Dr. Castro serves as the 8th Chancellor to lead the CSU and is the first Californian and first person of color to serve in this role. Prior to his appointment, Dr. Castro served as president of California State University, Fresno. Go Bulldogs.
Don't hold that against me.
He also worked in the University of California system for 23 years, serving as Vice Chancellor of Student Academic Affairs and as Professor of Family and Community Medicine at the University of California, San Francisco. Dr. Castro formally assumed the CSU Chancellorship in January 2021 and has since embarked on a tour of all 23 campuses and on making it his primary priority to close all student equity gaps in the CSU, the largest and most diverse four-year university in the nation. Chancellor Castro, welcome to Sdsu. I'd like to now invite you to share a few words before we jump into the questions.
Thank you, Dr. De La Torre. It's great to be here. Happy Friday to all of you. Thank you for coming on a Friday afternoon to have a conversation. I'm excited about this, and I was half joking on the Fresno State thing because, we're rivals in athletics, but you clearly are doing extraordinarily well in football. Congratulations. President De La Torre and I go way back. We actually served in the University of California system together, and I remember when she was thinking about being considered for this job and how excited she was, and I think it's a great fit, and congratulations again. Clearly there's a lot of wonderful progress happening here. I don't want to take up too much of your time with comments because I know we have the question and answer period here, but I do want you to know how impressed I am with what you're doing here at San Diego State. You have such a beautiful campus, and I've had a chance to meet with student leaders. I see some of them here. I just had lunch with them and learn more from them about their perspective and priorities. I had a chance to tour some of your great spots here around the campus and love love the trees, especially the coral tree, so beautiful. And your foundation board and your leadership. So just really excited about what's happening here and look forward to answering your questions and having a dialogue. Thank you, Dr. De La Torre.
Thank you. Thank you, Chancellor Castro. So it is now my pleasure to move into the questions that's submitted by our university community. So our first question is, Chancellor Castro, you had great success in Fresno with improving student success. We have a similar campus here at SDSU in our Imperial Valley campus, which is more than 70% Pell and more than 96% Hispanic. What kind of investments do you think make the biggest difference for students in communities like the Imperial Valley?
Well, thank you. First of all, I want to commend you for the work that you've done for all the students at San Diego State. In so many ways, you're leading the way nationally and within the CSU in terms of graduation rate, performance, as well as closing equity gaps. And I know the Imperial Valley campus is very important, and so I'm looking forward to learning more about that later today. But I would say continue doing what you're doing, which is listening to your students and to your faculty and thinking carefully about what practices are working well through your own analysis. And clearly you've been doing a lot of that already. I think part of this has to do with resources. And so one of my jobs with President De La Torre, and all of you actually, is to advocate for more resources from Sacramento and Washington, D.C., and I think that will help us because we know what needs to be done. We know that key student support makes a huge difference, and I would say keep doing what you're doing, and most importantly, just keep listening to what the students are saying they really need and deserve.
Thank you. Our second question is talking about faculty. You've acknowledged the tremendous effort required to adapt and maintain instructional quality during the pandemic and during the return this year. How do you feel negotiations are going, and are you supportive of increasing compensation for faculty in light of this effort?
Yes, thank you. First and foremost, I want you to see through our actions what we've done, and over the last few weeks we passed a budget. The trustees approved our budget for next year. And if you look at that budget, it actually has compensation as the largest single item in it. And that's because we all support fair, equitable pay for everybody. And we have a request for $230 million as part of our overall budget request for next year. So that is a demonstration of our commitment. We are currently negotiating with the CFA, and I'm cautiously optimistic that we can come to agreement here soon. I know there were meetings today, and I'm very interested and eager to see us find that common ground. And I had a chance to meet with all the labor leaders today and listen carefully to their different issues and concerns. And I want you to know that I am the son of a Teamster, and I was telling the group that as the Teamsters were making their voices heard so loudly that it was hard for me to hear the others in the room meeting with me, I said my father, who's passed away, he would have gotten a big kick out of that. So, so I want you to know I'm hearing you loudly and clearly, and I know each of the presidents supports fair, equitable salaries. And I also want you to know that we have both plans for a staff equity and a faculty equity study. Those will be completed by the springtime, and our plan is to go to the governor and legislature and ask for additional funding beyond our budget that we approved to go towards addressing salary inequity. And it will likely take a number of years to do that. But I want you to know that I've already laid the groundwork with the governor and with key legislative leaders. And your local Senator Pro Tem Atkins plays a huge role in this. So I know many of you know her and love her. I certainly do. And I think if she hears from you how important this is, that will also help to share your own viewpoints. But it's all to say that this is a very high priority for me and for the CSU. And I believe that in this fiscal environment, we have the chance to do better than we have in the past, and we need to do that to keep all of you here and supporting our extraordinary students.
Thank you. The third question, the CSU has always had a lean staffing structure,
Yes.
especially compared to the UC. But at the same time, and especially during the pandemic, this lean staffing structure was stretched to its limit. Can we expect to see increases in resources to support staffing across the campuses in the future?
I agree with the premise of the question. You and I both know there's a pretty significant difference in resources for the UC versus the CSU. And, that's a historical situation. But my view is we are America's most consequential university. We're the most diverse university. We transform students' lives from all different backgrounds like no other university around the country. So we're a great investment, and we've been very aggressive in our requests of the governor and the legislature. And I remind the governor who, when he was lieutenant governor, he used to always lecture the trustees and say, you're not asking for what you need to ask for what you need. So when I talk with him about our requests, I remind him of that, and then he kind of does this, like, yeah, I did say that. So he knows that we're going to be more aggressive than ever before, and my feeling is that, our students deserve that, and all of you who help to support them deserve that. So we will figure out a way to get more resources, and I know in talking to President De La Torre, as those resources come to bear, there are plans to add more staff and faculty, and that'll be the case across the system. The budget will also include funding for enrollment growth, probably 9,000 or so new spots for additional students, and we know that there's tremendous demand here, and we will be allocating that to the campuses that have the strongest demand, including San Diego State. So that'll be another way to add staffing and faculty over time.
So we know, thank you so much. So we
Yeah.
know there was a major impact on mental health during the pandemic. Individual campuses have responded differently to try to address and support mental health upon the return to campus.
Yeah.
But it's often an expensive proposition. What are your priorities when it comes to supporting mental health for students, faculty, and staff across the system?
Well, it's clear to me going through this pandemic that has been such a difficult time for everybody, but particularly for certain students and faculty and staff from certain communities. I know it's been disproportionately difficult for women and women of color, and I see that and I hear that from all of you, not just mental health services for our students, but for all of us. And we will continue to prioritize mental health services for our students through the Basic Needs Initiative, and that's one of the, if you look at the budget we just approved, that's one of the significant line items there, 20 million more for those kinds of programs. And I know each campus has different strategies in terms of how to fund mental health, so I'm going to try to get more resources from the state level, but then there can be conversations at the campus level about whether students wish to contribute more fees to do so. And I think together the most important thing is that we strengthen our mental health support, not just for the students, as I said earlier, but for all of us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can you talk about your collaboration with the California community colleges or any plans for future collaborations to ease the transfer process system-wide or otherwise make it a clear path for aspiring transfer students?
One of the things I noticed as a campus president, even during the time I was in Fresno over 7 years, the number of transfer students increased dramatically in just that period of time. And that's the case across the CSU. And I believe that we have an opportunity to do even more in that area, and the state needs us to do more. In talking to the University of California, they, for a variety of reasons, are not as focused on transfer students as I think we should be and can be. So I see a lot of opportunities there. And I meet regularly with Chancellor Oakley, and he's been away a little bit working with President Biden, so Chancellor Gonzalez in his absence. And there was a piece of legislation that went through the process this year it was sponsored by Assemblyman Berman that I think is going to make it easier for students to transfer. It will create a general education pathway for them so that it will be simpler for students from all over California to understand what the requirements are to get into any of the CSU campuses. And it will require our faculty to work together to develop that. I think that's going to be a very important component, and over time we're going to see an increase in transfer students, and each campus will have to figure out the right balance for themselves. But I see so many opportunities there. There's so many talented students who are in the community colleges that want to come to the CSU, and you know, some of them might want to go get their doctorates after. We need to think about the diversity of leadership in all professions, and I think the community college pathway is an important one.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
You've made closing equity gaps your #1 priority since arriving as Chancellor. Why was this important to you in particular among all the many competing priorities you would have faced as a new Chancellor?
Yeah. Well, part of it's personal. You and I have similar stories. I know we were both close to our grandmothers, and I was raised by a single mom and in the Central Valley like President De La Torre, so a lot of parallels there. But I remember going from Hanford High School in the Central Valley to UC Berkeley, and Hanford High School in Hanford, my whole city was smaller than the whole UC Berkeley campus. So, and I was the first in my family to go to college. I remember those early days and weeks, and I really did not know, you know, how to go from A to Z. I mean, I had not ever been in a place like that. I remember sitting in a classroom, my Rhetoric 1 class, and they passed out the syllabus. And I remember many of my classmates saying out loud to each other, "Oh, I read these books already. This is going to be great." And I looked at the syllabus. I hadn't read not one of those books. So I knew I had a longer road to travel, and I was able to do that. So for me, it's personal. I know that we have so many students who are in that situation, and I think they deserve the support that we can provide to them so that they can get their degrees and become leaders. And transitioning from being president to chancellor, as President De La Torre knows, we all knew as campus leaders what our graduation rates were and what our equity gaps were. But we didn't know what it looked like across different campuses. And so I started to observe that even campuses that were increasing graduation rates, and this isn't one of them, but there are some campuses that have increased graduation rates, but their equity gaps have grown, not gone to zero. So the situation, the inequity has been exacerbated. So with GI 2025, as you might know, the goals are to increase our graduation rates and close equity gaps. And you all are well on your way. I mean, to have equity gaps that are 0 or less than 4%, it's amazing. And that's what I would like to do across all the 23 campuses. And so it's personal and professional, and it's better for California, right?
I think I have to agree. Yeah, I remember that trauma of going onto the Berkeley campus. I just didn't even think I'd graduate, but we did.
That's right.
But it took a little bit of time, right? Okay, so now we go to our next question. Can you talk about your approach to improving the overall budget to the CSU? I think you touched on some of that, but maybe a little more detail. And what categories are you particularly focused on improving resources from the state? So I think it's a 2-segment, maybe a little more in detail on the budget issues and strategy.
Yeah, well, my working theory here is that California, and frankly the nation, needs the CSU to be successful. We are America's most consequential public university. We're the largest, the most diverse, and therefore, I think, most consequential. So then the question is, what do we need to be successful? What do we need to serve California, to serve the country, and we should ask for what we need. Let's not hold back. So again, it's on the web, you can see what we asked for: $700 million in permanent funding, $1 billion in one-time funding. We've never done that before. We upped our ask after I became Chancellor in January, and we were able to get more than we asked for in terms of certain areas. But this is the first budget that I've been able to really shape with President De La Torre and all the other presidents. And so I'm cautiously optimistic that we can inspire the legislature and the governor to fund as much as they can. In talking to him yesterday, he's going to do everything that he can to support us. But as you might imagine, with Omicron, there's a little bit of uncertainty about the economy. So I think he's going to be a little bit more cautious than he would have been before Omicron with his January budget around permanent funding. And he's going to be very aggressive on the one-time funds. And then hopefully Omicron is not going to be a mutant, escape mutant. Hopefully our vaccines will hold up. So if that's the case, then I expect that he'll become more aggressive in the months that lead into the May revise and then eventually approval. So we'll continue to be very aggressive there. And the economy has been unusually strong, as you know, and so the tax receipts have been going up, and that means that we need to be as aggressive as we can. And when I talked to him yesterday, I said, yeah, we're asking for $1 billion, and he didn't flinch. And I said, but we actually have $3 billion in deferred maintenance. So if you want to go bigger, you could get the whole $3 billion. And so he knows that. I want him to know that, and we're going to inform the legislature of that. So that's just kind of overall. And so you'll see compensation, you'll see investments in our infrastructure. We're asking for permanent money that we could use to finance infrastructure over time, as well as asking for one-time money for infrastructure. We're asking for more for GI 2025 to continue our work with graduation, improving graduation rates and closing equity gaps. We're asking for funding for basic needs, including digital equity, our C-Success program, which is over time going to serve all the students in the CSU to ensure that they have access to quality technology that's been such a big issue for so many students. So those are some of the priorities, and then we'll get into kind of the dance with the legislature and the governor, and they have their own ideas. So sometimes they'll say, well, we like this, but we also think you ought to do this. And then we have a conversation, negotiation, and then sometime around the end of June, we'll know, hopefully, where we're going to be with the budget.
Thank you. SDSU has a large graduate student population who not only study themselves, but are instructors and TAs for undergraduates as well as researchers. Can you talk about your view of how the CSU supports graduate students and any priorities you have for the future targeting their support and success?
Thank you. Well, there has been a lot of attention on our undergraduates, as you know. I would like to, over time, raise the awareness of the importance of graduate programs. They are so important, again, for our students and for California and the country. And this campus in particular has an abundance of strong graduate programs, including a lot of doctoral programs. So one thing is we need to build more support for graduate education in the state capitol. And I think that won't happen overnight, but I'd like them to see graduate education as being essential to the state. And I know you're going to be able to help me make that case because the campus here has so many model programs. So I definitely want to do that and get more support for those programs. My oldest son did his master's in the CSU, and it really prepared him well for his PhD. So as a parent, I had a chance to kind of understand graduate education in the CSU. And again, I think it's really important for us to continue listening to our graduate students. I know your president is a graduate student. First ever, right? Graduate student? Wonderful. And it's wonderful to see your leadership represented in that way. And I think it'll be really important for us to continue to listen to those needs and concerns and address them.
Thank you. SDSU students and graduates enjoy strong career placement rates in internships and jobs. What are your plans to improve career readiness and job placement for our graduates across the system?
That's such an important area. Again, we've been placing so much emphasis on helping our students get degrees, but that's not the whole story. And I've been hearing about examples as I've toured around the different campuses. And this is my 14th campus, by the way, President Del. I had 9 more. But I hear so many initiatives that connect the campus with key industries and that help prepare our students for different kinds of careers. And Dr. Alva, who's here, she's our Chief Academic Officer for the system. She and I would like to figure out a way to work with all the campuses to scale up more opportunities so that every CSU student has access to an internship, an apprenticeship, research opportunity. You know, at 500,000 students, that's a large scale, but if we can do that, I think it's going to be an extraordinary way of supporting them and helping them to be much more successful in getting the job that they really, want. So we're going to look at that more carefully, and hearing stories today, you're doing a lot of that already. So I think it's a matter of, how can we do that for every student in one way or the other.
Thank you.
Yeah.
President Del and Chancellor Castro, just as a time check, I want to move to some of the questions submitted in the last half hour.
Okay.
So Brittany will be doing that because she has.
I have them
good.
in front, and this is your opportunity if you haven't yet submitted your question, whether you're one of the 300 online or if you're in the audience, please go ahead and submit. So one of the first ones that was submitted is, can you specifically talk about what you're doing to address the student housing crisis across California universities driven by increases in the cost of living?
It's such an important area, and we've been raising the visibility of this area, again, with elected officials. And they've already provided some funding for housing projects. And I anticipate they're going to do more in this upcoming year because the legislators are hearing about this and they know how important this issue is. So I anticipate more opportunities for us. And then, of course, the other tools in our toolbox are P3s, which you all do very well, and other sorts of ways of self-funding. But what I've been hearing differently from elected officials in Sacramento lately is that they would like us to do less public-private and more public-public, and they think that will lower the cost for student housing. So my personal view is we need to be open to different strategies, but I think we're going to actually have a sharper tool, so to speak, with state funds to do more housing, because clearly that's making it very difficult for students, and also I'd add faculty and staff at many campuses.
You had an op-ed published in USA Today urging Congress to expand the Pell Grant. What
Yes.
role do you see the CSU, as the nation's largest and most diverse public university system, in continuing to advance that national conversation?
The Pell Grant is the #1 issue for us in Washington, D.C., in my opinion. 60% of our students receive a Pell Grant. You were a Pell Grant recipient, were you? I know I was.
You know what? I didn't apply for financial aid, but that's going to date me quite a bit.
I'm sorry. Okay.
I basically worked, and I didn't even know about Pell.
You didn't?
No.
Oh, no.
Yeah, that was I was a period of time where there was no financial information given, so I just lived at home and worked.
You made it. That's difficult.
Yeah, that's what I did.
I'm sorry.
I know, but
Yeah.
I certainly know about Pell. I'm sorry. I made it through though.
I was wondering if we had this in common because my mother loved me so much, but she wasn't into forms.
Yeah.
So I was the one that filled out the forms and then she
Yeah.
would sign it. But I remember doing the FAFSA, and so the Pell was a huge thing for me. And for so many of our students, the Pell Grant, really makes it possible for them to get a higher education. So there's two things about the Pell that we've been advocating for. One is to double the maximum Pell.
Yeah.
And that will increase the purchasing power and bring it closer to where it was, several decades ago when it started. So that's number one, and because 60% of our students receive Pell Grants, that will support so many students and help them succeed faster, is my hope. So that's number one, and then number two is making sure that Pell Grants can be received by our DACA students. And President Biden has been very supportive of that, Secretary Cardona. So those are our top two priorities, and then we're also advocating for research at the federal research funding and other support. But the Pell is so important, and that's what drove me to write that. Now, we haven't gotten enough support to double it, but we're not going to give up. We'll keep pushing hard, and I'm hoping to get Secretary Cardona here to visit San Diego State because he needs to see what you've been doing in terms of support for students from all backgrounds.
Can you talk about how you're supporting students of varying abilities in particular?
Well, I think I would start with, it's so important to listen carefully to what students are saying that they need, and that clearly is happening here, and I want that to happen across the CSU. And having been a president myself, that was what I tried to do as a president, and I know President De La Torre does it. So it's listening carefully, reflecting on the strategies that you're using, assessing them, making sure that they're working, getting rid of the ones that are not working, which can be hard, but doing that, and initiating new ones when you feel like you need that. But I think it all starts with listening carefully to the students and to the faculty and staff who are supporting them.
As a final question, can you talk about the COVID-related leave policy that was extended in October and what individuals should expect in the future regarding those policies?
Thank you. Well, in so many ways, I think the CSU really demonstrated leadership in being compassionate and flexible and reasonable with these policies. And because of the uncertainty around the pandemic, we're going to continue to, be open in terms of different strategies. And some of the labor leaders were asking me about future leave possibilities. I think in the coming weeks, we need to assess what's going on with Omicron and figure out where that's going to lead us, which is frustrating, right? Because we really have been seeing daylight here, but clearly the pandemic has its own mind. And so we just have to continue to be thoughtful and flexible and keep everybody as safe as possible and still meet our goals. And I just want to commend you all for being as aggressive as you have been in providing safe in-person instruction. I think that's been so important. And in talking to the student leaders, that's been something that they very much have appreciated. And yet, I know there's still some students that are worried about coming to campuses, and so having some compassion there is really important as well.
Well, is it time, Brittany? I think we have exhausted our time. I want to thank you again for a wonderful opportunity to have a conversation with the community, and I know we have a few more activities, so I want to thank also the audience, both those who are online and those today, for coming out to be with us with this wonderful conversation with Chancellor Castro. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, everybody.